If you were born after 1970, it's likely you spent hours constructing with colorful interlocking blocks. If you were a parent after 1970, you likely stepped on one of those blocks. I'm talking about Legos, of course. And over the years, the patterns have become increasingly elaborate, requiring detailed instruction. Star Wars ships, Hogwarts castles. It was those detailed instructions that caused my next guest to innovate. Or should I say his desire to read those instructions. He lost his vision shortly after being born, developed Braille Lego instructions as a teenager, and hasn't stopped innovating since. Today, he's going to share how ingenuity has expanded experiences for other people who are blind, and for himself as a musician, composer, rock climber, traveler, podcaster, and TEDx speaker. Incessant innovator, attentive advocate, multi-passionate and multilingual Matt Shifrin. Thanks for spending time with me today.
Oh, great to be here. That was one heck of an alliterative intro.
Oh, well, thank you. Over the 2 years that I've been podcasting, there aren't many guests who are so multi-dimensional that it's actually really difficult to narrow down what to talk to about with them. So congratulations, I suppose.
Very kind of you.
As a fellow multi-passionate person, I struggle with, which path to go down because I'm equally attached to all of my ideas. And for you, you not only have all these ideas, you're also equally talented at so many things. How do you navigate your, project priorities?
I think in my case, it's very much about organization and about deadlines. And let's say, for example, right now I'm writing a musical in Yiddish, and the musical is due in the fall. And I'm currently in North Adams, Massachusetts, out west near their Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. And I'm in this residency, and all day I sit and I work on this musical. And then we have lessons in the evening. And the reason why am I telling you this? Because this thing is due and the deadline is not changing. And as a result, you basically need to combine trying to figure out kind of when things are due and how much energy it's going to take to do them. And then you combine that with how much energy you currently have. Do you have enough energy to switch to a different project that will take you less time? Or if not, how much more energy can you expand on this current thing at this point, in your day/week before your energy runs out? So basically you're thinking about how much creative energy to conserve and how much energy to spend, and how much energy will all these different projects take up if you spend energy on them.
I like how you budget energy like time. That I feel like you're speaking my language right now, because my greatest fear is catastrophic loss of energy resources, both mental and in my body. So I think that's a formula I could probably work with. We could end the interview now. You just changed my life.
Sure. Great. Roll credits.
Roll credits. I love it. Let's go back to some Legos, because you were 13 years old. And you and a friend had created Braille instructions for Legos. And then you tried to pitch Lego, the company?
Mm-hmm. And it was a very interesting case, because we had these instructions. We had a website, legofortheblind.com, where we put these text-based instructions that describe the different pieces and where you put them. And it was all wonderful. And then we wanted to take a next step, and we wanted to get Lego involved. But we had absolutely no idea how to get them involved. They're a huge company. So I went and I Googled around and I found customer service. And I thought, well, companies have different branches. But if we find someone in customer service, they can kind of get us up the chain of command to eventually find someone who would kind of get interested in these instructions and help us help Lego itself make the instructions that we had created, take our language and incorporate it into their kind of production process, so that they would be able to take the language that we used and make their own instructions for their own sets. So I got in touch with customer service, and customer service said, oh, this is all lovely, but we don't know who to help you. We're customer service. If you lose a piece, then call us. If your instructions come damaged, then call us. But that's really all we can do. And so then it became a matter of how do you find the person you need in the big organization. And it was by sheer luck that I found the the person at Lego, Olaf Gerlofsson, who made the instructions happen in the company. And at this point, my friend had died of cancer. And the thing is, like after someone dies of cancer or whatever, there are many approaches to deal with it, of course. And in my case, I had this project and I wanted to see it through because, like, if I didn't see it through, then the project would die with the friend because the friend was writing all the instructions and she was doing the heavy lifting. I was acting as a proofreader of sorts, checking the instructions and building them and such, but she was doing a lot of the work. And if I didn't continue with getting these instructions to Lego, then the project would die with her. And it was also a wonderful way for me to kind of channel energy that would have otherwise been spent in just purely in grief, because the trouble is when the person's alive, you're so busy focusing on the fact that they have energy, on the fact that they have something worth engaging with, something worth doing. And like I would call her every day, multiple times a day, and even after chemo, she'd be exhausted and she wouldn't be able to talk, but she'd still be sorting pieces into Ziploc bags so that I could build faster, and she'd still be writing new instructions. And the trouble is that after she died, I had a lot of energy left because there was so much energy, like when talking to her and making sure that she had energy, she had purpose, she had things that were worth fighting for. And so now all this energy was up for grabs. And I went to a friend at the MIT Media Lab, because the MIT Media Lab, they have a group called the Lifelong Kindergarten Group within the larger organization. This group has done partnerships with Lego for many, many years. And so I thought, well, if any group can get me through to Lego, it's this Lifelong Kindergarten Group. I had a friend who worked there, and it just so turned out that he had a friend, and he said, oh, my friend just moved to Denmark to work with Lego. And so person A puts me in touch with person B, who puts me in touch with this Olaf Gerlofsson guy, who turns out to be our most stalwart advocate, our most staunch supporter when it comes to this stuff. And it was miraculous, because I mean, it's a giant company. It would just so happen that like this person happened to know another person who happened to know the person who would make this project come to fruition.
And how cool that now you can continue to interact and improve and contribute to this project. And it's like not just helping the community, not just an extension of your creativity and ingenuity, but it's also interacting with your friend who's no longer with you. That's really cool.
I mean, and the wonderful thing is that Lego, it's not just me writing them and saying, hey, when are your next instructions coming out? This has now become part of their workflow. They have, during each cycle, spring and fall, they have about 20 to 30 sets that they pick from all the different types and series of Lego that they make. And they make those sets accessible and make instructions for them, and then I check them, and then they release them. And so there is a steady stream of accessible sets coming out of Lego during kind of each part of the year. So for example, this year they're combining spring and summer. So in a couple of months, I'm going to be checking 40 or 50 sets that they're going to be sending.
What? Oh my gosh.
Then they put them on their site, and then they're up there. And the great thing is that these sets stay up on their website. So if you missed a certain set and you didn't have a chance to get it previously, you can still find them in stores or on eBay. And so it's not like there's no particular expiration date for these sets.
I downloaded the Star Wars Micro Fighters instructions.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, that's a lot. I was the person that didn't really want to read the instructions when it came to building Legos.
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed that it downloaded in an editable Word document. Is this open source?
Yes, it is open source. And the reason that it's done as Word documents was because that's how we did it when we started initially. Like initially it was a giant Braille binder the size of a copy of the Yellow Pages. And that Braille binder was great for me, but it was very bulky, and Braille takes up so much more space than print that a single book of Harry Potter takes up 13 volumes.
Oh,
Each of
wow.
those volumes is about the size of the Yellow Pages. And so we realized that we had to kind of upgrade our system so that this could be open source and that this could be given to other people. And I have a Braille computer where the top part is a normal computer keyboard and the bottom part is a Braille display. And so it has these scrolling Braille dots that you can feel. It's like a single line display you'd see on a calculator, for example. And I realized that we could just, my friend could type these out as Word documents, and then I could check them and build the sets and edit those documents kind of as needed if mistakes were found. And the wonderful thing is that Lego themselves, they're continuing that tradition. They're accessible instructions. You can view them online, but you can also download them as text files.
That's
And
incredible.
we just want them to be as accessible as possible. Even PDFs, for example, PDFs are great as a format, but some of them, if they're scanned images, blind people can't read them. And it's much harder for blind people to edit them. And so we just wanted to make it as user-friendly as possible and kind of as engaging as possible, just as plug and play as we could make it, which
Right.
is why we're using such standard file types.
Well, part of the satisfaction of building a big, elaborate Lego set is once you're done, you step back and just take it all in and feel that satisfaction of having built something so visually magnificent. Magnificent. Can you describe how you, once the Lego set is complete, how do you experience the creations after you've completed them, and what does that feel like for you?
I think that stepping back is the exact same for me, except for instead of visual magnificence, it's tactile magnificence. Because I've just built it, I can say, oh, they used I don't know, the barrel and the shark for a sculpture on the roof. And you have these little kind of references that Lego make when they build things. They made for example, a cactus out of swords, and it's an interesting technique for building. And you get to say to yourself, hey, I built this. I built the building, I built the room with the couch and the sofa, and then there's the trapdoor in the floor, and all of these elements, you know them because you as a blind person, you were the one who built them. And even though there's definitely visual magnificence, I'd also argue that since Lego is a toy designed for kids to play with, there's a lot of tactile significance as well, because they don't want you to just look at it, they want you to do stuff with it.
Right, exactly. And now I also understand that rock climbing is somehow connected to your Lego endeavors. I'm curious what makes a blind person go, hey, you know what's a great idea? Let's go rock climbing. How did that happen?
It was a funny story because I tried rock climbing as a kid, and a parent's friend was a climbing instructor. And so he got me up the wall, and there's this little hole at the top of the wall where the rope goes through. And I didn't realize that the wall was over, that I climbed to the top. So I wanted to keep climbing. And everyone is yelling, get down, there's a hole there, don't go through the hole. And I can't hear them. And so, because it's so high up, and so they have to send the poor climbing instructor to climb up and tell me, hey, you don't need to go through the hole, just come down and everything will be fine. Because for blind people, you don't know it's done. Like, sure, the rocks have ended, but maybe there's some ledge you need to climb over. You don't know. And so that was kind of my first experience. And then in terms of rock climbing, I'd stopped for many years just because I had things to do. And then a friend and I were meeting at some point just for the fun of it, grabbing coffee. And he said, hey, I coach blind rock climbers.
What?
Do you want to do it? And I said, sure, teach me how to do it. And it was very interesting because the way that blind rock climbers climb is that there is, like you go to a gym and you strap yourself in, and there's a person at the bottom called the caller. And what the caller does is that they yell directions up at you. And so they yell, for example, 12-1. Right 12-1 means that at 12 o'clock, 1 foot above you, to your right, there is a hold that you need to grab. And they might yell left foot, left knee, which means there's a hold that you'll get by lifting your left foot up to where your left knee is. And so they basically yell all these numbers at you, and it sounds like one big math problem until you finally get to the top, and then you congratulate yourself, and then you come to the bottom, and then they find a different route for you to climb up, and then you do that. And the trouble was that the climbing was fine. I had no issue with the climbing, but the issue was with understanding how to climb efficiently. Because as a blind climber, sighted climbers, they can jump like kangaroos to wherever they need to get up to because they can see how the route's laid up, and they can do a lot of mental calculation and say, okay, if I jump this hard, this high, reach my hand out in this direction with this type of grip facing the wall or away, I will grab this type of hold, which will help me get up the wall faster. Blind people don't have that luxury. And so as a result, they climb in a much slower, kind of more controlled fashion. But the trouble was that even though they climb slower and more controlled, they have no way to understand the intricacies of the route around them and the things they're climbing. And as a result, a lot of rock climbing is about body positions. And you need to think about the weight that you're putting on your body and how to maintain balance in weird positions. And that's really hard to do because the person who's your caller, they can only kind of describe the route generally. They don't have enough time to describe it specifically because that could take them, 10 minutes because these routes are complex and a lot of different types of rocks are on them. And so I thought, there's got to be a shorthand, some way to make these routes easy, some sort of overview that you could give a blind climber so that they could climb the route quickly and efficiently, and not only efficiently, but really understand their bodies better. And so that they can really understand what their body needs to do to climb in a more controlled and energy-saving way. And so I thought about Lego, and I thought to myself, well, if you can build anything out of Lego, you can build climbing routes. So I brought in a bunch of Lego bricks and base plates, and the friend who was coaching me, we just sat down and we said, okay, 2x1 is going to be a jug, and those are the big kind of dome-shaped holes that you kind of can stick a whole hand in. And 1x1s are crimps, the smaller, weirdly shaped ones that hurt your fingers. And
Right.
3x1s are ledges that you can rest a whole forearm or a whole knee on. And so we were able to create these climbing maps. And then the thing was that we were able to test them with other blind climbers. And it was really wonderful to see because these climbers, they were much more proficient than I was. These were award-winning first-place national champions. And still, they found it useful. Even though they were at such a high level of technique and skill, they found it useful because they were able to think ahead before they climbed. And they were able to really engage with the route in a different way because they were able to feel it and then kind of transport themselves onto this route and say, okay, this ledge is slightly higher than that one, which means that I need to grab it with right hand, put the left knee on that other ledge, which means that right knee is going to go out to the right, stretch right down to that foothold, and then I'm bending left, and then I'm grabbing with left hand. And all these intricacies of body positioning and body motion were now kind of accessible to them. And they weren't just relying on what the caller was yelling. They weren't just relying on their climber's instinct. And they weren't just assuming, oh, if I was moving my left leg, then now probably I'll be moving my right arm because it's the opposite. And they were able to really understand these routes and engage with them kind of on all levels, even before they climbed. And as a result, what was interesting was we saw much better technique and much more focus from these professional climbers, and it helped them. And I was very, very glad that it helped them because I was kind of worried because they were so professional. I mean, they were the best in the country, and they competed in world championships regularly, and so these are professionals. And I was thinking, oh, well, if they're champions, why would they need this, blah, blah, blah. But it still helped them. And it was just amazing to see that even the most experienced blind climbers can benefit from more information about kind of the routes that they go up.
Yeah, that is so brilliant. And it's a reminder to always be thinking, as far in the realm of innovation, yes, what we're doing now works, but how can we make it better? I just think that's so smart. When you're up in the air rock climbing, do you feel the height in your body? Does it feel different than being on the ground?
It does, but I think it makes things a little easier because when you're on the ground, let's say you're a blind person and you're walking somewhere, walking down the street, there's a lot you need to keep track of. The cars that are passing you, buildings you're passing. Are there any landmarks that may tell you where you are? Oh, this big potted plant that I just smacked into, that's the plant by the bank. So I know that I'm passing the bank. And oh, coffee is drifting out of the Dunkin' Donut. So I know that I'm passing that. And there's a huge amount of mental calculation that you're doing to make sure that you're getting where you need to go and you're getting there on time and that you're kind of that you're focused on where you're going. Because if you don't focus, it's very easy. Just a quick aside / funny story that will explain this. I had blind people have these teachers called orientation and mobility instructors. It's a big and fancy name, but basically they teach you how to get around without bumping into things. And one of them, he brought me this sensor. And he said, the sensor is great because it will vibrate because your cane, when you use your cane, it can only detect things that are at ground level. Anything above your shins or your waist, you're not going to be able to find it. So if there's one of those metal parking, goodness, what's the name of those like metal bollards that they have that they use so that cars don't drive up? There's a name for them, but
there is a
painful.
Name. Yes, they are.
So you smack into them. And so this sensor, the professor says, would be perfect for it. And I say, oh, that's lovely. And I take the sensor. I have the sensor in one hand and the cane in the other hand. And I'm walking down the street and I'm listening that there are cars on my left, but there are also these driveways on the right. And I need to make sure that I'm not veering into the street, but also I'm not veering into the driveways and that cars are not backing out of the driveways and that I'm not in the way of the cars. And meanwhile, this sensor is just humming along and the professor says, oh, it'll vibrate very strongly if it detects something. So I'm walking and thinking and doing a lot of calculations. And suddenly I smack hand first into a pole. And I think, how did this pole get? And I stop and I kind of realize that this sensor, for the past couple of feet, it's been vibrating like crazy, but the body has tuned out this other method of stimulus because it's been too focused on listening to the environment around it. And so all the tactile stimulus from the sensor has been completely tuned out. And so why did I tell you this story? Because with rock climbing, there are only two directions, up or down. Sure, you can go left or right laterally on the wall, but all you need to think about is how to get yourself from point A to point B, but without all that extra stimulus. You're like a marble in a maze, trying to get from the beginning to the end. And it's very freeing because there's not a lot of, and you're just up there and you listen to the person who's giving you directions and you tell your body what to do and it responds and that's it. There's no stress of travel. There's no, another funny aside, like when blind people get Lyfts, for example, or Ubers, they can't see the color of the car. So a lot of the time you're standing on a quiet street and counting cars. Oh, this one passed me by. It must not be my Lyft. Oh, this one stopped farther down the sidewalk. Is it my Lyft? No. Some people just got out of it. Therefore, it must not be. And so there's a lot of calculations there. And so basically what I'm trying to say is that there are calculations that blind people do all the time to make sure that when they're out and about in the world, that they get to where they need to go. And the glorious thing about rock climbing is that you don't need to think about anything except how to get up. And you don't even need to worry about how to get down, because when you get up a route, you're done. People will just belay you down and you'll gently float to the ground. That's it.
Wow. I never thought of that. That makes total sense. It reminds me of how I feel surfing. It's just a tranquil headspace and a literal just tranquil space.
Yeah, as long as you can catch a wave and ride it. Who cares what happens?
That's your only job when you're out there. How cool.
Exactly.
I think about when you said the brain doing calculations, I wonder if that's part of your secret sauce for having all of these wonderful innovations. But then I also remember that you are the child of Russian immigrants. And in my experience, first and second generation immigrants, they just have a secret sauce of determination and innovation and resourcefulness. Have you observed any difference between maybe how you were brought up compared to how your peers are brought up who aren't second generation?
No, but I think part of the reason is that a lot of my friends are immigrants. Like in my case, I'm first generation because I was like born in the U.S. That's the first of my family to be born there. But it's interesting because a lot of my friends, and it's I'm just thinking how to phrase this. In my case, in a lot of my friends' cases, the immigrant isn't necessarily the thing that drives them. In a lot of cases, they could be just born in the US, but in their case, they have these problems and puzzles and conundrums that they're trying to solve, and they're very goal oriented. And they're very, it could be because kind of the fact that their parents came from different countries and had to struggle, et cetera, that could be part of it. But it's also just the fact that a lot of my friends are very good at setting manageable goals and then planning for them. And they set and they plan, and then they might have to rethink or replan or scrap a project completely, but they're still completely engrossed in what they're doing. And that level of immersion is crucial because it gets them to where they want to be. It gets them that far because they basically tell themselves, hey, I have a goal. I'm going to immerse myself in this thing because this goal, no one else is going to do it but me. And that's what drives them. But also, I have friends who are not immigrants, and they are as driven as my friends who are immigrants because they have goals. And I think it could be partially the immigrant kind of experience that drives us somewhere from deep within. But I think it's also just partially personality and tenacity and just your kind of personal drive that can make or break things.
And certainly the resourcefulness is such a fantastic asset, to be thriving in life beyond base level existence. And, from my experience, my brother has cerebral palsy, and I remember being I wasn't a part of the wheelchair basketball team, obviously, but he was, and I was by proxy, I guess you might say. And there was some real value in the parents and the families exchanging resources that were, I don't know that we could Google back then, but that were not searchable online. And I also used to be a sign language interpreter, and that was huge among the deaf community, especially around tech. It was like, hey, back in the day, it was called a sidekick, and it was before people texted, but the deaf community had these sidekicks, and they were like cell phones with big keyboards. And everyone was talking about the best place to get your sidekick and how could you get purchasing it subsidized. And so there's these resources that when collected make thriving so much easier. I would love for you to share about the resources that you gathered to give your TED Talk. I found that specifically especially interesting.
Oh, that was a whole adventure.
Yeah.
So I'll start at the beginning. I get an email one day and they say, hey, would you like to do a TED Talk? And I say, sure. And then I think about it a little bit more and I realize, whoa, I just signed up for this thing and now I actually have to do it. And I look at other people's TED Talks and they're great and they're detailed. But the thing is, a lot of these people, they're sighted. There are some blind people who do TED Talks, but they still have slides and people are running them. And I think, how am I going to do this? And I realized that I don't know how to gesture. I don't know how to point at things. I can't just stand there and talk for 10 minutes straight. They're going to boo me off stage or throw tomatoes because they need visual engagement, not just someone kind of bringing their ideas forth. They need proof, visual evidence. And so I found a coach who I have an episode of my podcast, Blind Guy Travels, about all of this. And it's interesting because we get to meet the coach. And the coach had never worked with blind people before, but her whole career is about teaching people how to gesture. And she talks a lot about business people and how business people are pitching to investors. But the trouble is they're pitching with numbers and they're not telling enough of a story. And they're doing all these wild gestures that they've learned from their families. And those gestures don't mean much. They don't mean anything. They're just flapping around. And instead of using small, meaningful gestures to help bring their points home, these business people are thinking that grandiose motions are gonna get those investors to say yes. And so when this gesture coach came and started working with me, it was all about taking the talk, and she would create the gestures. And we would go through the talk line by line, and we'd say, okay, what sections do we need gestures for? And she would create the gestures, and she'd teach them to me, and I would practice them in my living room and in my dorm room, and I'd be there for hours. Just because, like, as a blind person, on one hand, you don't want to be robotic because sighted people can tell that you're robotic. But on the other hand, you can't struggle with these things and be like, oh, where does my hand go? I think it goes here. I don't think it goes there. And I took all these elaborate notes about how to do this. On big fat box, take your hands and put them in an X shape, one palm up, one palm, kind of palm on palm, hold them in front of your belt buckle, then move them in a circle upwards, and then the circle expands, right arm goes right, left arm goes left, and then they connect down kind of by your belt buckle. That's an explanation of one gesture.
Wow.
We had a lot of explanation. So I had this document with description after description of these gestures. And then it was also a lot of fun because we had to, there's a section in the TED Talk about describing videos for blind people, and about how there are these people who their whole job is to narrate movies for blind people and make it so that the blind people can understand what's happening. The monkey jumps out a window nimbly, touching down on the ground. It scampers off, searching for a banana, for example. And I had a friend, and it just so happened that he turned out to be one of the best synchronous video describers ever. And it was a fascinating thing because usually the way video description works is that you have someone who writes a script and then a separate person who records that script so that it's all professional and well done and yada yada. And this guy just so happened that he didn't need a script. You could give him any movie in any language, and he could read subtitles and describe at the same time. And a lot of the research preparation with the TED Talk was also like recording this guy. And we would get there and we record a section of a movie, and just being able to kind of capture his intensity and his commitment to the process was really cool. And it was just gathering these different aspects of my life. There was right when Lego for the Blind launched, we had a documentary called How Lego Helps Blind People See. And it was a very cool documentary made by a neuroscientist who has a YouTube channel called Braincraft. And it was really, really cool because when Lego for the Blind came out, I wrote all of the science-based YouTube channels I could think of. There were like 30 of them. And I wrote them and I emailed them, oh, here's our project. Would you be interested? She was the one person who replied. And I'm very glad that she did because that's what got Lego interested. When we came to Lego and when I came to Olaf Gerlofsson, this video was proof that this system worked. And here was how we did it. And the documentary that she made has footage of Elida, the family friend, writing instructions. And it was just great because it wasn't just theoretical. Here were people using it. There was footage there of the host building a Lego set using these instructions and her kind of understanding the terminology and engaging with it in that way. And so basically in terms of resources for the TED Talk, it was collecting different snippets of life that would be interesting and then figuring out what binds them, what ties them together. And in that case, it was how to kind of help people be more creative. And in my case, it just boiled down to thinking about these problems in different ways, thinking about them, just trying to figure out how can I look at this from a different angle to make this manageable to myself and to make this doable.
And I'm so glad that you did. And I'm so glad that the podcast is like a more zoomed in approach of those everyday experiences. When I listen, I love your podcast. Please make more episodes.
Oh, I'm working on it.
Okay, good.
After I finish the Yiddish musical, that's what I'll be doing.
Well, first things first, naturally.
Naturally.
Yeah, I really, really loved it. I love the Foley effects in it. I love it really does feel immersive, and it gives you a new perspective, which is kind of my obsession.
Of course.
Tell us.
Curious introvert.
I am so curious. I know. I want to know, how does
this
work? Can you tell us about your face detection tablet?
Oh, gladly. So my friends at MIT had this big table, and the table was made up of these square pins, and they moved up and down to make different shapes. And so you can make squares and triangles, and they're like big pixels. Each one's about the size of a postage stamp. So a friend calls me into his lab and he says, look, I got Mario onto this device. So blind people can play Mario, and Mario's made up of 4 squares, and he hooked it up to a Kinect body sensing camera. So when you jump, the 4 squares jump, Mario jumps. When you move your feet, Mario moves, and you can feel the environment around Mario, and you can feel the different obstacles, and you can figure out which ones Mario needs to jump onto, which ones he needs to avoid. You can feel enemies coming at you, and you can jump on them to squish them. That's all fine and dandy, and it was very cool. But then he asked me the crucial question, what else would you like the system to do? And I thought, what would be really cool would be feeling people's faces and being able to get the visual information that sighted people get from facial expressions, different degrees of smiling, or wrinkling at the corners of the eyes, that sort of thing that adds a whole layer of depth to conversation for sighted people, and a whole layer of insight or possibly confusion, depending on who you talk to and how. And a week later, a friend calls me back in, and he says, yeah, I did it. And I'm like, you did it? He's like, yeah, stand here. And so I'm standing in front of this table, and he's standing in front of the camera. And he starts talking, and the table whirs to life, and his mouth starts moving. And it's moving and moving. And the funny thing is, as a blind person, your mouth moves, but you're not feeling other people and checking whether their mouth is moving. So you just assume that it is. And so I'm kind of feeling his mouth and his nose and his eyes, all using this tablet, so I don't have to poke him. And suddenly his eyes, they just start moving, and they're moving left and they're moving right, and something's happening. And I ask him, are you okay? He says, yeah, why? And I said, well, you blinked 7 times during the previous sentence. Does that mean anything? Oh, I guess I just blink a lot. I've never thought about it. And so we keep talking, and everything's fine until his mouth opens really wide, like he's a boa constrictor about to eat an alligator. And I whip out my phone and I say, are you okay? Should I call an ambulance? He says, no, stop freaking out. I just yawned. Everything's fine. I just yawned. And it was funny because as a blind person, you know that you yawn. You know that other people yawn. But the silent yawn is just something you assume, because people yawn and then they say, excuse me. Oh, he must have yawned. But here, you're getting that yawn in its full wide open. And it sounds silly and kind of ridiculous, but this is a whole new level of access when it comes to this sort of thing.
It really is a whole new level of access. That is such a good way to describe it. When I think about all the things that you're doing, that creating access to, it feels like adventure advocacy. Because growing up with my brother, we lived in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. He was born before the Americans with Disability Act was established. And living in the Midwest, everything was slow to get there, and then even slower to be implemented, right? So my secondhand experience of advocacy, both with the deaf community and with wheelchair accessibility and just fair treatment, was all about, a fight and conflict and lawsuits and all of that stuff. Is all of that more of a thing of the past, and now it's about this greater experience?
I think it depends on for whom. I am extremely lucky in the sense that I went to school in a very good I went to school in a very good school district that had very good Braille teachers. And in the same state that I'm in, other people are having to sue their school districts because they're not getting teachers to teach them Braille in that same state. But just because I lived in a certain town, I was able to get a wonderful Braille education. And none of my parents were instrumental in making sure that I had the things that I needed. They were always advocating. They came to meetings, they talked to teachers, they were there 100%. And I think that really taught me that parents are wonderful, but at some point you need to step up and you need to do your own advocacy, no matter what that entails. The only reason that I'm advocating for the things that I'm advocating for is because I can, because I'm not worried about not receiving the instructions, Braille instructions to read. Not because I know people who are losing their sight later in life, and it's much more difficult for them because they're having to learn Braille. They're having to learn all these things that they didn't know. And now suddenly they need to learn how to use a computer for blind people. They need to learn how to read Braille. And it's a whole different, how to use a cane. It's a whole different way of life. It's a whole different approach. And I don't have to be in that situation because I was born blind. And yes, there are absolutely still lawsuits, and there are still things that are not accessible, and places where if blind people use service dogs or guide dogs, they aren't let into a lot of establishments. And so there have to be lawsuits. They're not being let into Ubers or Lyfts a lot of the time because the driver says, this is my car and you have a dog and I don't want your dog there. And so they're stuck. They're having to take 5-10 lifts to get to a place, and their drivers keep canceling, and the companies really are not doing enough about it. And they report the drivers to the companies, and the companies are just like, and maybe the driver gets disqualified, but when you disqualify one, another pops up in its place. It's like whack-a-mole.
You're right. Well, I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing, and I'm so glad we got to have this talk. Thank you so much. Can you tell everyone where they can keep in touch with you and your many projects?
Oh, of course. The best way to find me is on Lego for the Blind. They have that website has a forum where people can get in touch. There's also my podcast, Blind Guy Travels. And if you Google Blind Guy Travels, you'll find it. And then there is also an article that might be interesting that I wrote for the Boston Globe magazine about the face detector. Because now basically the friends at MIT, they built one the size of a table, but now we're scaling it down to make it the size of an iPad so that you can carry it with you and you can take it to job interviews or dates or wherever this sort of face reading would be required. And so that article is cool because it goes into the kind of the insights that blind people get from these face reading devices, not just blinking and yawning, but really going into why this is helpful and how this is helpful.
That's incredible. Well, thank you again, Matt. This has been amazing.
It's a pleasure.
Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. I hope to see you next week too. I talk with the most interesting people that you've probably never heard of. Most of them are paradoxical and bring an opportunity for you to grow as a person. So if you like bright, meaningful entertainment, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications.